And that concept of data sovereignty has become lost. I would say it's gone in the glitz and simplicity of run that service up over there, attach to that bit of application, and do this quickly. New services are bundled in all the time, and we just take them. And in that fast adoption, we have to consider where our data is and who potentially has access to it. We also need to keep in touch with the legislative requirements that are upon us. And these aspects, they come lost in that determination to move forward. But should we be more concerned about protecting that data? We all know that along with our people, that data is our most important thing. Without those assets, we've got nothing, we've got no business. The trouble is, we've let our data out, and we need to be thinking about bringing it back home. So, what does it mean to be truly sovereign with your data? I'm sure most of you will probably know the answer to this, but just to make sure, to be truly sovereign, there are three aspects. There's the storage. It needs to be stored onshore at all times. We need to process that data within the UK. And we need to have complete confidence that it never leaves our shores, never transits through another country, or becomes part of the background processes of our hosting provider. And finally, the support systems that are in place and the teams that look after it are onshore with us in the UK. By keeping the data in country, it means we have control over the laws and regulations that are applied to that data. By keeping it in country, we safeguard the companies that we work for. We safeguard that sensitive information, the intellectual property and the trade secrets, whilst, because we know whose hands are on that data, reducing the risk of unauthorised access to the data. By having data sovereignty, we ensure that organisations have autonomy to make decisions based on our context of our country, rather than being subject to external influences. And in this, I'm referring to the difficulties that some companies have found when they get to a point where they want to remove that data and the cost is just too high to do so. To make it work requires that we also establish the right foundations. We need governance, we need control, and this involves implementing a lot of robust policies and practices that prioritise the trust of the privacy, the ethics, and the accountability in the control of that data. The trust is fundamental. In a data-driven world, as customers, partners, stakeholders need to have confidence that their data is being handled responsibly. Protection of privacy is paramount, requiring companies to implement appropriate measures to secure personal and sensitive information and make sure that we safeguard the individual's rights and comply with the laws and regulations that are required. And the ethics, as we collect more and more data and we gain more and more very granular insight from that data, we have to make informed decisions to ensure that we're employing responsible data collection, usage, policies, and avoid the bias that can come from those large data sets, safeguarding against discrimination. And the people in our organisations, they need to be accountable. We must take responsibility for our data handling and establish clear lines of responsibility and provide transparency to the stakeholders. Effective governance is essential, and navigating the landscape of compliance is complex. We all know that. We do it day by day. It can be an absolute nightmare. But we've got to be diligent. We've got to look at the way data protection and regulation requirements evolve and change, making sure that we understand legal frameworks and the industry-specific regulations that apply to your specific operations. To meet these requirements, we need to be proactive. We need to engage with the legal compliance experts, be guided by their efforts, prioritise ongoing education for our teams, and promote that culture of compliance. Now I know it sounds like I've sidelined and I've gone into a talk about data protection. I'm sorry. It always is there. And I guess I have. But it's to demonstrate one really important point. In the world where your data is sovereign, you've got one compliance methodology to worry about. Where your data is going across the globe, how many legal frameworks do you need to be aware of? And are you prepared to work under them? Everywhere your data lands provides you with a different challenge. How many people have you got in your legal department? What's their knowledge of international data protection laws? If it's stored there, processed there, you are subject to the laws that are local. Will your legal teams ever talk to you again if they keep getting phone calls from the other side of the world asking for help around a data protection issue? A quick history lesson. In the early days of cloud computing in the UK, like many others around the world, we started seeing the benefits, and we were leveraging cloud services very quickly. It was in response to sovereign cloud services that various initiatives were created in the UK. One example being the UK government's Crown Hosting Data Centre service, which was launched in 2015. It provided a secure and resilient data centre environment and made sure that the data remained within the UK, promoting data sovereignty and reducing reliance on non-sovereign cloud providers. And that was the UK government's planned response to a sovereign cloud for UK BLC. And what they were looking to build was shaping up to be something really special. Departments were working together, which if you've ever worked in government, it's something that's quite hard to do. And what they were defining looked really good. It was even classed by the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity as world leading. But then what did we do? We did what we always seem to philosophically do. We threw it to the market. We let the market decide. And of course, the large computing providers, cloud providers, offered us cost savings, scalability, flexibility. They sold it almost Walmart-like, selling it high, stacking it high, selling it cheap, as the old saying went. On the face of it, it allowed us as IT leaders to focus on our core competencies, while relying on the external providers for our IT infrastructure and services. It packaged it up in easy little boxes that could make us and our budget lines look good. But what have we done? Are we actually playing with a gently benevolent partner, innovator, or are we swimming in a pool of sharks? In a market that they've created, they control, and they're leading us further and further to a place where we aren't in full control of what happens to our data. As more and more tools are baked in, the underlying infrastructure of their services and more things around the edge are provided to us for our benefit, who amongst us is really ready for AI? The components are being integrated into their core services, and they're there enabling the harvesting of data to feed the great AI engines. And yes, to be fair, there are options out there that you can go and run in spaces without those tools. But of course, they come at a premium. We've seen in just the last couple of weeks how a big multinational has been bitten by an accidental leak of information on ChatGPT. So whilst they're delivering the things that you want and need, that's great. But when those services don't quite fit purpose, what do you do? How do you go off menu and keep control and it not cost the earth? Are we actually the latest client of the local drug dealer, where we've been hooked and we're now trapped into addiction to the offered services? It brings the question of some of the tools that we're probably all using. Where's your data through its whole life cycle? Who uses Power BI? Data's not processed here. Spell check in Office 365, anyone? Utilises Power BI. That data not processed in the UK. Again, sorry, digressed a little. But when we look at these things, we may be signing up to something under the hood and not really realising the full impact of it. It's there in the T's and C's, but let's be honest, you've read all of them. I know I haven't personally. Thankfully, I work with great people who have the patience for that kind of thing. So we're seeing some companies waking up to this concern about data sovereignty and wanting to maintain control over the data. And it is starting to gain hot prominence. As data breaches, privacy concerns are becoming more and more regular, it does raise questions about where the data is stored, who's had access to it, and again, what law has governed it. And because we've let the data be stored in data centres located outside of the UK, subjecting it to foreign laws and regulations, we've also breached our own laws and allowing it to go to foreign soil without explicit permission. This raises concern about data privacy, security and compliance, and the ICO is starting to sharpen their teeth and take more interest. I'm going to give a little shout now to a wonderful executive order that you might remember, 12333. Anyone remember that? It was signed back in 1984 by Ronald Reagan. And yeah, I'm hoping to get a few extra speaker bingo points for getting Ronald Reagan into a speech about cloud and data sovereignty. But that executive order is really important to us in this country. It created the NSA. It didn't just create the NSA, it created a lot of other bodies that have got the right and permission under US law to intercept and utilise data that crosses their borders into the US. As a result, now in the UK, for all companies, especially those of us who operate in regulated areas such as finance, healthcare and government, we need to re-evaluate our approach to cloud services and to exercise a more stringent control over the data that we hold. And the adoption of sovereign cloud needs to become more focused. I'm going to bring in another definition at this point, digital sovereignty. It's a bit of an aspiration, as it says there. Deals with the entire digital infrastructure and technology, the communications. It encompasses a range of aspects, including the full development of our digital capabilities, and I'll come back to some of that in a little while. It mainly focuses around the critical infrastructure, and the formulation of sovereignty is often concerned with our national security and economic competitiveness. So making sure that we hold and we control everything from the infrastructure upwards, and data sovereignty, if you like, is a subset of that. Know where it is, make sure you can control it, keep it where it should be. So the two things work in tandem. Edward Snowden and Matt Streams highlighted the disparity between our assumptions on digital sovereignty and the reality of data sovereignty. Snowden, as we know, former intelligence contractor, whistleblower, call me what you will, brought to light a series of revelations in 2013 about widespread global surveillance programs conducted by that little group, the NSA, that we mentioned before. Snowden disclosed that the extent of surveillance activities, which involves collection and analysis of massive amounts of data, often without the knowledge or the consent of individuals or organisations. And these revelations shed light on the vulnerability of digital communications and challenged the assumption of digital sovereignty. It became evident that even countries asserting their digital sovereignty were subject to surveillance of foreign intelligence agencies, undermining their control over their own digital infrastructures and communications. Schrems, an Austrian privacy activist, played a crucial role in highlighting the gap between our assumptions for digital sovereignty and the reality of data sovereignty in the context of transatlantic data transfers. He filed a complaint against Facebook in 2013 challenging the transfer of personal data between the European Union and the United States. The case eventually led to the invalidation, as I'm sure you know, of that EU to US safe harbour framework. He argued the mass surveillance programmes revealed by Snowden undermine the privacy protection of European citizens' data, exposing the conflict between that assumption of digital sovereignty and our data sovereignty. Now, on the road to data sovereignty, we all know that we see different providers proclaiming their clouds are sovereign. It's only that last definition that really makes you truly sovereign. In fact, yesterday we saw one of the biggest players in the market release a lovely, shiny marketing piece of information. It redefined the definition of digital sovereignty to say digital sovereignty could be global. It also didn't mention data sovereignty anywhere in it. It just said 3 words: advanced sovereign control. Does that really give you confidence that you know where, how, and who is looking after your data? It didn't give me much control, much confidence. Good business is a mix of risk and reward. We all know that, we do it day to day. I was listening yesterday, as maybe some of you were, to the boss of ChatGPT giving evidence to the Senate committee in America, and expressing concern by a lot of those giving evidence, particularly Professor Gary Marcus, who suggested that there was a need for an independent body like CERN, not dealing with physics, but dealing as a test bed for these AI solutions as they come along, ensuring that they're looked after, managed, and are safe before we release them out into the world, and before we stumble into a minefield that we've got no route out of. As more and more data is harvested to feed these sizable data sets that we want for the birth of AI, the session showed that companies with literally billions to spend are showing a really worrying lack of awareness or care relating to both the security and ownership of the information. And monsters being built, I would suggest, that we have little control over. AI will change people's lives. We've got no doubt about that. We're on the borders of potentially the next great technological evolution, in much the same way as the printing press was centuries ago. It is going to become part of our lives. And once true AI systems are live, we're going to have concerns about misuse, as well as the many benefits that we're going to gain. We only have to look at the select few with enormous power and enormous wealth that are already being quite negative disruptors of skills and investment. We're creating a complete loss of control. Can you possibly legislate against a company that's got so much money they simply don't need to count? After all, it's just a fine, pay it, move on, rather than just fixing the underlying problem and the issues of sovereignty of the data. If companies continue on their current trend, investing in big multinationals, hyperscalers, ensuring that there's a constant stream of revenue away from the UK, there is a potential that we'll just see more and more wealth leaving our shores. Companies and financial dependents, along with economies outside of our control, will have the bulk. Wealth distribution is changing, but it's to such an extent that we're creating individuals with potential and power to bring down entire countries. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank just the other week is a signal of these start to change and a possible move in that direction. Next one, please. We've had quite a few years of underinvestment in IT. I was talking to somebody earlier on from the NHS, and it's quite woeful, the amount of money he has to do his job each year. A couple of weeks ago, Jeremy Hunt announced a £900 million pot to build an exascale supercomputer. Great word. Also to establish an AI research resource with an additional £1 million as an incentive to the person or company who does the most to research AI. £1 million competing against companies with billions. We're just not ready for the oncoming storm. Globalisation will only work if we have a fair share of the intelligence. And as we continue to allow our data to become offshored and not remain in the UK, are we just giving ours away? The UK investment is a veneer, smoke and mirrors, whilst billions are being made off the back of it outside of the UK. Outside of the money, we're going to take us back to a point I made right at the beginning. We're also losing skill. It's our other most important asset. As we move into a controlled market of the clouds, we're changing the skills that we require in our teams locally. And by so doing, we're actually losing some of those skills that we used to have. And inevitably, people will still want to use the skills that they've learned over many years. They'll move to the big data centres and potentially offshore. So now, we're not only handing away our data, we're allowing ourselves to remap and potentially lower our skill sets in our teams. We've got to realise that cloud doesn't always mean hyperscaler, multinational. We're failing to recognise long-term goals over quick wins. We used to be a manufacturing country, particularly here in Manchester, absolute heart of it. We need to redress the balance, and it's a widening balance between us and the rest of the world. A one-off investment of £1 million or 900 million to build a big cloud thing is not necessarily the answer. There are cloud facilities in the UK already. We, as IT leaders, need to decide where we want our expertise and our intelligence to sit. Not just for now, but for the future, and to make conscious decisions about who potentially has access to our data. I've sounded incredibly dark through all of that. Don't get me wrong, I love technology. I love what we do as an industry. And let's face it, it's why most of us came into it. We want to play with the toys. And the technology is improving. AI will become mainstream. The metaverse is coming. The question is, will we be in control of our part of it? Or will we be watching others take it all over and build it in their image for their benefit? We need to control our data. It needs to come home where we have control of it. That is that. Thank you all.